Judicial decision-making. At the end of the reading for this topic, Baum talks about how legal scholars and political scientists understand court processes and outcomes. We're going to take a few minutes to get a basic grasp of this, and we'll be revisiting it throughout the semester. The main question we're dealing with here is, how do judges make decisions? There are three main perspectives that we use to understand judicial decision-making. They each focus on a different facet of the decision-making environment. The first perspective focuses on the letter of the law. This includes all of the different sources of law we have outlined earlier in the course, including the Constitution, statutes, administrative rules, and previous judicial precedent. This is called the legal perspective. The legal perspective argues that judges are largely constrained in their behavior by what the law actually says. This perspective is based on the assumption that the language of the law, broadly understood, is relatively precise. In other words, the law usually provides something akin to a correct or at least a better answer to the legal questions that judges have to answer. This means that judges have a fairly small area of real discretion. The legal perspective does not deny that judges are human. Our judges are among the most highly educated people in our society. They have usually given a lot of thought to issues of public policy, and they all have their own personal views about what our society should be like. But from the legal perspective, these personal views don't really influence the judge's decisions. If they do, it's only on the margins. This means that sometimes judges are forced by the law to make rulings that they personally don't like. The book gives some examples of this. Sometimes it's hard to know when this happens, but other times the judges may make a point of communicating dissatisfaction with the state of the law. Occasionally, they'll even call on lawmakers to change it. The second perspective on judicial decision-making focuses on these personal views of the judge. There are several different theoretical models that fit under this broad category, and for now, we'll lump them all under the heading of the personal perspective. This perspective argues that the personal characteristics of the judge have a sizable impact on the decisions that judge will make. This is based on the assumption that the law, by its nature as a collection of words, is imprecise. The law, again understood broadly, doesn't consistently provide a single correct or best answer to the legal questions. For this reason, the law doesn't provide much constraint on the decisions that judges make. So, the judges have to find some other way to break the tie, or to choose from among competing case outcomes. How do they do this? Well, in short, they rely on the other knowledge that they have about the world. This might include general policy stances, including whether a judge is liberal or conservative. You're probably familiar with these terms from your 101 class, and the book gives some examples of the types of policies that conservative and liberal judges might prefer. Judges might also be influenced by partisan considerations, like whether they support the Democrats or the Republicans. For reasons we'll discuss later in the course, this might be particularly important in the decision-making processes of some state court judges. But judges might also have particular personal experiences or interests that influence how much they care about particular issues. Take the example of Justice Clarence Thomas in Virginia v. Black. Thomas is pretty universally understood as the most conservative justice on the Supreme Court. But over time, his experience as a black child growing up under the Jim Crow in the South served to change his position on whether the First Amendment protects hate speech. Known for his characteristic silence in the courtroom, Thomas spoke up in these cross-burning cases. In Virginia v. Black, the court held that states could not assume that a person who burned a cross was motivated by an intent to intimidate. Thomas dissented from the position. As Professor Scott Gerber puts it, race sometimes influences his decision-making. In other words, the personal perspective denies that judges are particularly constrained by the law. Instead, judges find a way to make the decisions they like. The third perspective on judicial decision-making argues that the decision-making context matters. There are several theories that fall under this broader category of the environmental perspective. This collection of theories has in common the focus on the institutional context of judicial decision-making. It shares some of the basic assumptions of the personal perspective, mainly that judges try to pursue their policy goals and that the law doesn't constrain their behavior very much. However, the environmental perspectives don't think that judges are essentially unconstrained. The different theories posit different sources of constraints. For example, the decision-making of judges on appellate courts is constrained by the fact that they cannot make decisions unilaterally. In order to achieve their policy goals, they must convince several of their colleagues to side with them. In other words, the internal decision-making procedures on the court can influence the behavior of its judges. But there may also be external influences on judicial behavior. Judges may be swayed by the position of influential interest groups and the broader public opinion that they might represent. For example, judges might be somewhat unwilling to make intensely unpopular decisions for fear that the public will lose confidence in the courts as an institution. In addition, the wishes of the other branches of government might influence the court. If the courts fear that the other decision makers may ignore their decisions or perhaps influence public opinion against them, they may adjust their decision-making processes in order to protect their high public standing. Let's take a moment to watch a relatively famous example of the sometimes tense interplay between branches of government, here between the president and the court.
With all due deference to separation of powers, last week the Supreme Court reversed a century of law that I believe will open the floodgates for special interests, including foreign corporations, to spend without limit in our elections.
In this video, we saw the president giving his 2010 State of the Union address. He was discussing the court's controversial decision in a campaign finance case called Citizens United. You can see several Supreme Court justices in the audience. They look quite uncomfortable as the president criticizes the court's decision in the case. You can even see Justice Alito mouthing the words, "Not true," as he shakes his head in disagreement. According to the environmental perspective, the judges have a lot of discretion, but their discretion is not unlimited. They understand that other branches of government can make the lives of judges more difficult, and the judges might adjust their behavior in response to this. In short, there are a lot of different perspectives on understanding judicial decision-making. The most important consideration is the degree to which and how we think judges are constrained. Can judges do whatever they want, or does the law or environmental context keep them from pursuing their policy goals?